Good morning and happy Memorial Day. We hope you are enjoying your day today. Many people have their days off, probably enjoying barbecue, if you will. I hope the weather's nice today. But as we enjoy the barbecue, I think it's a good reminder for us to reflect on the service members who have given their lives to protect us, this country, even the right to barbecue, if you will. And so I think it's a good time for us to remember and to reflect and to be grateful for the sacrifice that they have given to us and this nation. Today, we are talking about one topic and hopefully going at it from different angles. But we should do the intro first before we do that. So why don't we do the intro and then we'll do that, what I was just going to do. We'll do it after the intro, what I was going to do after the intro. What I was going to do. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang. We have with us Pastor Eugene, Chunsuk, and Brian. We're always here doing what they do best. Eating snacks.
What are you doing this Memorial Day?
Speaking of, today, I don't know. I don't know what the day holds. I might be running 10 miles. I might be eating 5 burgers. I don't know what I'm doing today, to be honest. But I know I'm listening to this podcast, that's for sure. So today we are talking about the topic of death. And I thought this would be an interesting topic. Well, actually, no, I didn't think that. You had thought that this would be an interesting topic for us to talk about. And I think just to kind of think about what death is and how Christians are to view it, because different people, different cultures and ideologies view death differently. Some have this bravado of facing death head on. The Emperor of Roma, Marcus Aurelius, from the movie Gladiator, so Russell Crowe in reality, is quoted as saying, "Death smiles at us all, but all a man can do is smile back." Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, is quoted as saying, "Death is nothing to us, since when we are, death has not come, and when death has come, we are not." And so there are different views of death. Different religions view death differently. And many, understandably, fear death. Yeah. So the question we want to tackle this morning is what is death? Is it a transition? Is it the end? Is it simply ceasing to exist, as the show The Good Place would have us think? If you haven't seen The Good Place, I ruined it for you. They just cease to exist at the end. So what is the Christian worldview?
They cease to exist at the end?
Yeah, in the show.
Wow, that's so sad.
But so the show, and I share this a lot, is actually a little bit more reformed than you would think. And I think it's by mistake. They're at the end of the show called The Good Place. They all get to heaven. They actually get to the good place. Seasons 1 and 2 is actually they're in the bad place. Yeah, but they were faking to be the good place.
It was like the plot twist.
Yeah, and there's the plot twist. Boom, you're actually in the bad place, and this is all an experiment. But they get to the good place at the end of their lives. And what these characters do is they spend millions of years doing the things that they thought that they had wanted to do. So, for example, if they want to go jet skiing in the Bahamas, there is a portal, and you go through it, and you go jet skiing in the Bahamas. If you want to go skiing in the Alps, you do that. So they do that every single day for, I think, many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, they realized they're still not satisfied. They're not. All of the things that they had thought would make them happy in heaven, having everything, does not satisfy them. And so there is a door at the end where you can, even those who are in heaven in this show, you can, if you want, just cease to exist. You just become molecules. Actually, but that wouldn't mean that you exist. But you just disappear. Mm-hmm. You vanish. And all the characters choose that option at the end because they realize at the end of the tunnel, there's nothing that's really that enjoyable. And so I think it's pretty atheistic in nature.
Nihilistic.
What is that?
Nihilistic.
But there is a form, a hint of Reformed theology in there saying that heaven isn't about just you enjoying whatever you want to do. There is a greater purpose to heaven, and that's worshiping God forever, as we read in the Bible. And so I thought that was interesting, and it's atheistic, nihilistic, and Reformed a little bit, hint of it, a tinge. at the same time.
Yeah, I saw an interview by Bill Maher and Charlie Kirk the other day. Well, I saw snippets of it. And the reason why this topic came up to me and I asked you to do it, and mind you, I don't ask you to do a lot of topics. You usually pick it. But every once in a while, I do want to do a topic, and this is one of the topics that I wanted us to do. He said, well, Bill Maher is a self-professing atheist, but he did grow up Roman Catholic, so he went to Catholic school. And Charlie Kirk is a professing Christian. And so Bill Maher was saying, I don't want to look toward that. I'm obviously paraphrasing. I don't want to look toward all that other stuff. I like it now. I like it here. I like drinking, whatever that he was drinking, bourbon or whatever it was.
Wow.
With you and talking. This is what I want. This is like the life. And so it's about enjoying the now, which is also a very nihilistic way of thinking, which reminded me of what you just said about the ending to the good place.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, unless you are fulfilling the purpose for why you were created, you will never be satisfied. And I think that's what the good place was kind of hinting at by mistake. But that was interesting.
Well, at the end of the day, what?
At the end of the day, unless you're fulfilling the purpose for which you were created, which is worshiping God, you will never be satisfied.
Hey, I don't know if they would. I didn't watch it, but I doubt.
I don't think that was the end goal. That's what I got out of it.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So nihilism will, if it was nihilistic, then you could tell me if I'm wrong about that show. Mm-hmm. But it's about enjoying the here and now. Yep. If you can enjoy the here and now, then, that's the main purpose.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the overarching theme of the show. It's because these people are in the afterlife and they realize, hey, the afterlife isn't really that worth it. And so it's not worth it to think about the afterlife or live for the afterlife, live for the now.
That is actually very Nietzschean.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the broad.
So it is pretty Nietzschean. I only saw the first season, but even in the first season I was watching, I was like, it has a lot of Nietzschean themes. Mm-hmm. And obviously then nihilism will kind of come in eventually. And I guess it did by the third season. But the reason why I asked you to do this too is because of the things that are happening today. There's so much death going on that we are now becoming more aware of. In the world, in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in other places around the world, maybe even heard about South Africa and things like that. And I think we'll talk about it later, what happened at the Israel DC. Embassy, Washington, D.C., right? The workers there. And I think if you want to be able to, and this is across the spectrum of whatever you believed, if you want to understand life, you have to be able to somehow contemplate death. It depends on how you look at death. So the way you look at death is how you will see life. And I think I wanted to start off with that. The way you look at death will show, how you look at life.
So I wanted to read for us Genesis 3:19. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you are taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. This is God's punishment upon the son of man for his disobedience to God's command. And here we see the punishment of death being pronounced upon man. And because of the sin, death comes into the picture. And I think a lot of times we think that death is simply a result of cells dying due to age or just a natural happening. That's why people can say cause of death is natural causes. But there is nothing natural about death, as we see in the Bible. Death is a supernatural punishment that was placed upon man, supernatural in the sense that it entered the world through God's intervention. It wasn't a cycle that God had placed, running its natural course. It was a supernatural intervention that was placed upon man due to his disobedience. And so I guess as we begin this conversation, naturally the question is, if Adam had not sinned, would there be no death? And what does the Bible teach us about death?
It's really hard to imagine a world without death because we're living in it.
Right.
So it's hard for the fish to imagine a life outside of the water because once they're out of the water, there's no imagining. They're done. Yeah. I don't know if they actually imagine in the water, but you get my point, right?
Yeah.
And so, I really do want to get a pastoral take at the very end, toward the end, but the way we think about death will affect how we live life. And if you are more on the side where, look, even Nietzsche had to actually address death. But there are people out there who don't think about death. And perhaps it's a blessing. Perhaps it's a blessing because you could just live and you don't have to think about death. But when death starts to come, it comes in droves. Does that make sense? So,
wait, what does that mean?
So when you're young, let's say you're 34, turning 35 this year.
December.
This just as an example.
December.
In August. And so let's say you're 34, 35. You're not really thinking about death. Not really. Because the closest that you probably thought, not everybody. There are some people that do. But for the most part, because we live in such a stable society where people are relatively healthy for a long time, and we're not in the middle of a war right now. I'm just talking about our current area. Your grandparents may be the closest death. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But once you get to, let's say, your 40s, 50s, and 60s, your parents are going to die. Mm-hmm. And then you're the next in line.
Right.
But when your parents die, that means all their friends are probably dying. And then once all of them die, then your peers will start to die. I'm saying it comes in droves because when you're like 2-3 generations away from death, you don't really think about death. But once you're 1 generation or 0 generations away, it comes in droves because they become closer to you.
Okay. Yeah.
So the people that are closest to you are going to start dying. So there's a lot of ways people grieve. Like John Mayer, he wrote a song. Yeah, he wrote a song called "Stop This Train."
That's about death?
It's about death.
I didn't know that. I thought he was
like on a physical train.
To be honest, I never really listened to John Mayer, but I just never would have thought he was
It's a pretty
deep
popular
like that.
song because of the way he played the guitar.
He's a good guitarist, though. Top 20 for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
in the US.
I don't listen to John Mayer, but I did listen to that song, and the way he plays it in his live version, not the studio version, was actually pretty brilliant because he actually speeds up the song because this train is going faster and faster, and he can't stop the train. And Chunseok knows he's nodding along.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like John Mayer, that song was pretty decent.
He's pretty talented in that way, I think, as an artist. Yeah.
But it's about death. It's about death. And so when it starts to come, it comes pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And, you have to contemplate. But so you could take it as a blessing that you don't think about it now. Or you could take it as maybe this is not good and I should contemplate some things about death because it will eventually come. And so philosophers and thinkers, even theologians, I would say all of philosophy was theologians until modern era, which I hopefully will want to get to, all thought about death. They all thought about death because I believe the way you think about life is how you think about death. So the way you perceive death is how you will look at life. If you don't think of death as anything, then you probably won't think of life as anything. But if you think of death, let's say, as like you just disappear into the ether, then this life is all you have, then that's how you'll live your life, yes? If you believe that there's an afterlife, then, that's how you'll live a life. Your life now, thinking about the afterlife. If the afterlife is supposed to be greater, then you'll start thinking about that. That's where the good place, the story, starts not to connect with some of the thoughts that you have because they're trying to do something profound by showing you the afterlife can't be any better than this life that we have. Right, even if we have like 1 million years to snowboard or, jet ski, it won't be as good. And so I do believe that it's a little Nietzschean, but in the end, it all comes from a place. So, going back to the past, people thought about death. One of the more famous ways of people thinking about death is by Socrates and Plato. And so they believed that there was an afterlife. Just like the ancient Greeks did, they believed there was an afterlife, Hades and things like that. It was just another world, right? Yep. And so they took it to another level where they saw death as then your soul does separate from the body, but it's more almost like a liberation from the body because you're physical, and this is where the Stoics would eventually come. your physical body has all these desires that take away from really the soul's desires.
Right.
And so, if you really wanted to live life well, you needed to practice for death. That means you need to get yourself ready for the eternal realm of forms and the capital F. And I talk about forms a lot, but this is just saying you need to get ready for the bigger reality.
So for them, what did that mean? Getting prepared for death. How did one prepare for death in the minds of these philosophers?
So you actually have to engage your soul. That's why you would read your favorite, Socrates' work.
Euthyphro.
Right, Euthyphro. And so it's about like, what do you know? And then, you have the apologia or the apology where Socrates actually invites death and his followers are very confused. And I don't know if many people know this that are listening to the podcast. There's this guy who was actually a cartoon drawer, and the cartoon's name was Dilbert. The title was Dilbert. And so his name is Scott Adams. And he just went public with his cancer. I'm not exactly sure which cancer, Brian. Maybe you could look it up. I do believe Scott Adams had prostate cancer and then it metastasized, very similar to Biden's news recently.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he went public with that knowledge. Is that right? Yeah, so it was right. And so a lot of people are kind of bummed if you were, a follower of Scott Adams. And he just said, please don't send me any like remedies. Please don't, do anything. I'm just at peace with me dying, which is a very, very different take than most people.
Yeah.
I don't think most people are like, I'm going to fight it even though I have the 1% chance. I'm just going to fight it till the end. He kind of just took it. He's like, now that I know I have a limited time and I know that at the very end it's going to be very painful, and he actually braces himself. It's going to be incredibly painful. He's going to die an incredibly painful death. He knows it, but while he knows that there is an end time, it was almost as if he was not just sober, but thankful about it because he could say his goodbyes before his body diminishes to that degree where he won't be able to do anything. And so those are like
sad to think about.
But that's the point. Like sometimes we think about death too late.
Yeah.
And when it comes to drugs, it comes so fast we don't know how to handle it. And I think for the Christian, people thought about death a lot. For the modern Christian, however, my take is that we don't think about death when it's not near us because we've been so influenced with modern philosophy. Whether you know it or not, because you went to college, and whether you know it or not, all these professors that you had, maybe they were Nietzschean, but they had all these Sartrean philosophies, and they wouldn't name it, but they would, teach it according to that kind of philosophy. And so because of that, we don't think of death, or we think of death as something far off, or, we think of death as something I need to give you, just like the terrorists would do, right? I need to give you this death, right? Because death is something that you should fear because you're so weak and things like that.
So I guess how has the view of death, and you were talking about how Christians today are influenced by the philosophy of death of the modern age, of like today's age rather. But I'm curious, and you did mention some ancient Greek philosophers there, but how has the view of death evolved to where we are at today and how the world views death?
Well, I mean, we had the Stoics. You mentioned Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. We had the Stoics, and
Epicurus as well.
Epictetus.
Was he a Stoic?
No, he was a little before.
He's a little guy? Oh,
yeah,
a little before.
But Epictetus is one. He's a pretty popular one, apparently. Yeah. But yeah, and so it was focusing on living virtuously as much as you can, as much as it is in your control. Because death is inevitable. It's an inevitability, right? just like Thanos. He will keep on coming out and saying, I am inevitable.
Yeah.
And his name is Thanos. That's a play on Stoicism.
Yep.
Saying, and then, the Avengers is fighting death, which is inevitable. But because death is beyond our control, we should focus on living well. And that's what the Stoics would do. They want to make sure that we live the best way possible. And we have other philosophers that came in, people like Descartes and Pascal. Those are like 17th and 18th century philosophers. And then people really liked stuff like that. Pascal's wager, You know what I'm talking about, Pascal's wager? Well, belief in God has eternal reward. Disbelief in God has eternal damnation. But if you don't believe in God and you think there's nothing anyway. So his wager is, might as well believe in God.
I see.
It's a very simple, it's a reductive way of putting Pascal's wager. Right. There's nothing to lose if you believe in God, because if God is real, then you would have gotten this eternal reward.
Right.
But if God isn't real, you didn't lose anything, that kind of thing.
Right, because you would have nothing to begin with.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so might as well believe in God. That was his wager. It's a little reductive, I get, because he's way more than just the Pascal's wager. But this is what most people know about Pascal was his wager. There's a lot of dualism in the Christian's mind when we think about the mind and body, or the body and soul. And so that separation. And so people think about that a lot. I really want to get into modern philosophy, though. We could go back to, and if you ever have questions, just stop me, Sam.
Yes.
About like Muslim philosophy on death or Jewish philosophy.
Yeah.
But we'll definitely get to the Christian philosophy. So Nietzsche is a very famous one because, like you said, the shows that we watch are Nietzschean. The comedies that we watch are pretty much Nietzschean. And what Nietzsche did was he was good enough to tie death with life, which is smart. And so he wasn't a dumb guy, he was a smart guy. So death was an affirmation of life because you're not dead yet. That means your life is affirmed.
Yep.
And so he would eventually reject afterlife notions. I get that. But that does mean that you should live authentically and creatively in the life that you have now, which is why he would eventually go on to talk about the Übermensch, that we mentioned, the Superman, right? Because that is the eternality that we always wanted to achieve. We should achieve now with the Übermensch, right? And so that's why I'm saying that example you mentioned about the good place is pretty Nietzschean if you think about it like that, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, what we'll have is the birth of existentialism, like Camus or Jean-Paul Sartre, right? Jean-Paul Sartre is a pretty popular one, so I'll talk about it a little briefly. If you have any other philosophers you want to talk about, we could talk about like Schopenhauer. But Sartre was the lead thinker in what we now know as existentialism. And it's about, he doesn't believe in God. The universe doesn't have meaning, and that is actually the conflict that he poses. The conflict that he poses because the universe is just random. It's abstract, and you can't understand it. It doesn't have any meaning to it. Then we need to. The conflict is our desire for meaning, because all humans crave meaning.
Yep.
And so there is this desire, and that he really hones in on that. And for us to have that meaning, we need this radical sense of freedom in our lives, which is why we see what we are seeing now. Either the woke left or the radical right that we see all are kind of this existentialist kind of belief where, we're not thinking about death as to define life. We're thinking about life to define life. And so, we want to be thinking about possibilities, future possibilities. And so even though we have the absurdity of life in itself because the universe is meaningless, embracing that absurdity and then going on to put in meaning or get freedom out of it is really that kind of existentialist philosophy. And I think that's what kind of led a lot of our beliefs on life to now. YOLO or you do you, or
YOLO was big for a minute, actually. Yeah.
and then what is it like? Treat yourself. All these things.
I think it's treat yourself.
Yeah, treat yourself. All these things that we kind of laugh at, but kind of embrace at the same time. Mm-hmm. So we're laughing at the absurdity of it, but we're still embracing it.
Yeah.
That's Jean-Paul Sartre. And so we actually embrace a lot of it, even Christians. So we don't think about death as a thing to necessarily mourn. We just got to live life really like to the fullest now.
But I think the reason why even Christians may think that way is because whenever the topic of death or even thinking about death comes up, it becomes a downer. It's a downer. And you don't want to be a Debbie Downer. You don't want to think about death because it just puts you in a down mood. Rather, you want to think about life. You want to think about the things that you could do in this life, the vacations you'll go on, the careers you'll have, the children you'll have, all these different things. You want to think about the joys of life because that's what uplifts you, but not death. It's a downer. And I think that's why people, even Christians, may respond, or how they may respond to something like that. But you're saying that as Christians, we need to think about death.
Yeah. I mean, Junzak just put in his 2 cents. And he reminded us that Christian ministers would put a skull on their desk to remind them of death.
How does he know these like little tidbits? Where does he get this from?
I do believe Mohler said that. I think it was Mohler. Yeah. Al Mohler. And so
I do love Al Mohler.
To always have the reality of death about you would make you a better minister is what we have classically believed. And there are things that, I have been told as a fledgling pastor, someone who's just budding into the ministry, right? I was told you can't miss 2 things in life. You can't miss the birth of a child. So when they invite you to bless the child, always go, right? And so that's what I do. And then you can't miss a funeral. Mm-hmm. So those are the 2 things because that's the beginning and end. And the people around will always remember, oh, this person was at the birth of my child and this person was at the death of, this loved one.
Yeah.
And so people always remember. And because these are things that are maybe the most heaviest things in life, the beginning and the end. So if you think about the beginning and the end, your life actually changes. When you stop thinking about the beginning and the end, your life can meander and you get lost in the things that don't really matter. So going back to Scott Adams, you said it was a sad thing, but at the same time, what was different about him? Knowing the end, he's able to do things with much more clarity. So if you knew for sure that you had, let's say, 1 year left on this earth,
right,
you would live differently right now.
Yes.
Right now you would live differently. Mm-hmm. And so the reality of death hasn't set for a lot of people because they think of death as something very far off or for someone else. And that's actually not true. And that's where the Genesis reading that you did was so impactful because even from the beginning, death is mentioned. Mm-hmm. Genesis means beginning, but even in the very beginning, death is mentioned because death is part of our reality. So when you ask the question, what would life look like without death? I don't know. We actually don't know what life would have looked like without death because death is the reality. I mean, every single part of this material world is dying. And this is, when I even talk about physics and things like that with people that love physics, because I only talk about physics from a layman's perspective, right? And so when I talk about physics, I talk about simple things like, the rotation of the earth is slowing down. True or false?
True. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you know anybody that likes physics? I'm not saying anything.
So you're saying like I'm the only one that likes it. Yeah, I get it.
No. Do you know people that like physics?
Maybe not as much as me here in this church, but I talk about this fellow I met in Japan who also was a physics guy.
Yeah.
But
it's slowing down, yes.
But that's the reality.
Right.
Okay. Reality is Earth is slowing down. We always have to adjust our clocks too eventually after a while because we need to account for like the second we lost. Or
I did not know that.
Yeah. And so because it's slowing down. So you won't have like an exact 24 hours
Right.
because it's slowing down. Eventually, it'll be like 24 and 1 second. So they'll have to adjust it back.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? Just logically, not physics, just logic. Logic would show you that it was faster at one point.
Yep.
And if you continue to go back, that means there was a beginning. And the beginning, this is what I talked to the physics guy, beginning could have been super fast. Like God just spun it around like a top. And we're now at the final stages where it's just slowing down more and more and more till it finally comes to a stop. Creation will stop. The universe will stop. Death is all around us. People think the universe is forever. That's why we have things like the multiverse theories, because we think, oh, if this universe dies, there's going to be another universe. But everything will eventually stop. Even if you have a multiverse theory, it's like, oh, there's just an infinite number of universes. False. Even if you think like that, philosophically speaking, logically speaking, everything will eventually cease.
Yep.
There's no infinite if there is simply creation, because everything dies, right? And so there will be a time where even if it's but it's so far away, we don't have to think about it. No, it's so far away. You made it so far away so you don't have to think about it, but God did not make it far away. God made it really close to us in Genesis, so we ought to think about it, right?
Yeah.
That's my point. And so I get it, like Nietzsche, if you kind of, reduce it down, that's why we had that self-help era and all these like creative things, because we wanted to embrace mortality in the way where we're not thinking about death, what happens after, but because death is going to be final and it's going to be instant, it's going to be just the end, we have to make do with what limited time we have now. And I get it, like, Jean-Paul Sartre had what eventually would come up with in his existentialist philosophy, like secular ethics and how we can live now, how we can make meaning in a meaningless world, that kind of thing. And that's where we see a lot of Sartre in modern film and storytelling. We see a lot of that now where people are like, oh, it's so moving because he made the most of his life right now before he died. Because when you die, that the movie doesn't show what happens after. It's always about what he did with the remainder of his life.
But I guess in response to that, isn't a part of that a good thing? Like, we want to be good stewards of our time. And to be honest, I think most of us would rather fall into the temptation and sin of laziness rather than the sin of like overworking, let's say, or idolatry of work, perhaps even, because a lot of us tend to be a lot more lazier than we would like to be. And so I'm curious, I know that, we don't follow we don't follow that philosophy, but I'm curious, isn't there some goodness to that kind of thinking as a Christian?
Well, eventually I do believe that it's incoherent in the sense where if you believe that there, like Sartre did, there's an absurdity to life because the universe doesn't have meaning, that means life wouldn't have meaning. Mm-hmm. But we constantly try to find meaning, and then we're moved by meaning. So there's ethics that come out from this movement to have meaning. If you really believe that, then you can just fall into, I'll just say nihilism, but you could fall into, well, the universe is meaningless, so let me fight for this one belief that I have. And eventually there is no consequence. Ultimately, there's no eternal consequence that I can think of, because this is the meaning that I put on myself.
Gotcha.
I'll give you an example. If you shout free, free Palestine, and you need to get rid of all these, genocidal, I'm putting these in quotes, genocidal maniacs in Israel. You need to kill all the Jews. That's your take, and it's very existentialist, in my opinion, because you put that meaning to life, there really is no thought of afterlife. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of these leftist terrorists do these really evil deeds, because that's the meaning they put on their life. This is the ultimate meaning. I put that on. I wear my keffiyeh and I do all these chats. I go into Columbia campus and I protest, quote unquote protest, but it's really calling for intifada, right? And if I do that, then yeah. And then I should say that there are those that claim to be on the right that still also want the killing of the Jews or killing of people, which is just a fascinating topic on the side, why everybody wants to kill the Jews. That's a side topic that maybe we could get into. But in the end, it's the Jews that control the world. They're, behind the curtain pulling the strings like the Wizard of Oz. And we need to get rid of them pulling the strings because they're the ones doing all this evil because they're really evil people and they want the downfall of the world. And so there are all these conspiracy theorists that talk about like Jewish control and things like that.
Just as, I guess, an aside for our listeners, existentialism is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the belief that you create your own meaning in this life.
Yeah.
It's based on you and your freedom. And the connection to that nihilism, which you also mentioned, is a belief that there is no objective truth.
Yeah, and then put that together. So we have what we have from Sartre. We have what we have from Nietzsche. You put it together, there's no truth. Meaning is self-given because your freedom is the ultimate thing. Look at our art today. And people are saying it's objectively garbage. But how can you say it's objectively garbage? Because art comes out of a reflection of the philosophies of the world. And so when you see a banana with a duct tape and people are just reveling over it, people just love it. And other people are like, this is just stupid. They don't care. They don't care, right? And so we're seeing it reflected in the arts. We're seeing it reflected in like the arts, like the movies that we watch.
Yeah.
Even like the superhero movies that you would have enjoyed because you read the comics in the 60s or 80s or 90s or even the early 2000s. That has now shifted. So these beloved characters have these like existentialist and Nietzschean properties to it. And, I don't know, Superman didn't come out yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Superman that would come out would have some of these qualities.
July something.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm not surprised because that's what they're doing to all our superheroes. Now, if you didn't read comic books and you don't understand like what these heroes classically stood for instance, Superman was a superhero for the United States of America, but it has not. Now, we're more globalists, so Superman is like the hero of the world. Yeah. I get it. But, because we can't think simply nationalistically because that's evil and whatnot. And so if you didn't read it and then let's say you grew up, you're a millennial or even a Gen Zer perhaps, I think it's more millennials, you will still enjoy these movies because you don't actually know, let's say, what Superman really was about, and you don't see the change. What happened to Superman, or like the character of Thor, or the character of Iron Man, or Captain America, things like that. And eventually, it's going to go more and more worse. Like, you can't have a Captain America. That's so nationalistic. How can you have a Captain America? And and so you eventually have to get rid of the idea of Captain America. You have
Captain
to put
World.
Yeah, you have to put someone else in, right?
Capitan World.
Maybe he'll have a star on his head, and he'll have a shield, but it won't be Captain America. It'll be something else.
Yeah.
And so those are things that eventually change over time. And I'm telling you, it's because people have adopted Western philosophy. So we saw what happened with Socrates. He was getting somewhere, but what we saw was it was still missing. What was missing even from the Stoics is actual true purpose and meaning that is beyond the self, because we couldn't find it beyond the self because only you could give it to yourself because you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what's in Hades unless you came from Hades.
Yes.
You don't know what's on the form unless you came from form. The Christian idea is different because we have someone from the capital F. We have someone from the forms that came to us saying, I can testify about myself because I am from the Father, and the Father testifies about me, which you would have heard yesterday, actually. But that's what the Christian understands. This goes beyond even the Old Testament because Jesus wasn't there in the Old Testament. It was an illusion. There was a shadow of the things to come. But Jesus is actually someone who came from the form that people like, the old philosophers looking to. And then he says, this is what the Father is like. This is what heaven is like. So he's actually telling you the attributes of heaven so that when you live now, you can live according to what is the reality beyond the veil of death, right? And so that's what is important in the Christian philosophy. But now when we get to the modern era, people wanted to, forcefully, like really, really overtly go against that notion and that philosophy. This is dumb. I don't like this, things like that. And that's why we have people like Jean-Paul Sartre really come into the picture. He was a fool, right? I believe it was Jean-Paul Sartre that kind of dated or was together with Simone de Beauvoir, right? And so both her and him would come up with all these insane ideologies that people follow now. And now we're eventually seeing like the absurdity of their claims, like feminism, which is Simone de Beauvoir, and abortion, and like, equality without distinction, meaning I'm all for equality, but you have to be able to just have a distinction between man and woman. If you don't, that's why we have this whole transgender nonsense now. And it's all starting from Simone de Beauvoir. And so, things like that. And so I do think that we need to know perhaps some of the things that we kind of enjoy or following now is not cohesive with the Christian philosophy and theology.
If you think about it, their dates must have been crazy. Like, what do they even talk about? Like, they must have talked, like, one would have to talk for hours, and then the other one would talk about hours about their thing. And so their dates must have been, like, crazy. Like, no one wanted to sit near them, probably, because they were lunatics.
I don't know. Maybe if you're just pontificating upon pontification, you think you're so brilliant. But eventually people picked up on it, which is so sad,
Like, do you think they were like, oh, you're brilliant? Like, no, you're brilliant. Oh, you're brilliant.
I don't think they were.
They were like French, like, oh, tu es brilliant, or something.
Yeah, I don't think.
Paris baguette, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is then, in light of all that you have just explained for us, the Christian philosophy, the Christian view of like you just said, of understanding Christ's words, and then in conflict with the world's philosophy, how is a Christian then to think about death? And I think this is a pretty hefty question, only because we don't really know what to do with death sometimes. And the reason why I say that is because, okay, we know where we go at death. We know where non-believers go at death. But we don't know whether to celebrate. We use different words, right? Like, oh, this person has fallen asleep. This person has gone to glory. This person has passed on. And this person is with the Father or with the Lord. We use all these different phrases, which are true. But my question is, I think oftentimes Christians don't know how to act. We don't know whether to celebrate death, whether to be sad, how are we supposed to feel? And I've heard of funerals where people say, don't mourn for me, don't cry for me, just enjoy a cookie that I enjoyed when I was alive, have a party because where I am is much better than where you're at. Some people think like that. Other people think, well, we should still have some type of respect and honor and have a somber moment for this person because this person is no longer with us and we're going to miss them. And we are witnessing the fall of man here and the punishment through this death. And so Christians oftentimes don't know how to act. And so I guess what is the biblical way of viewing death? Is it a mix of the two? Is one inappropriate and the other is appropriate? Like, how do we view this? And I do want to get to visiting the cemeteries or the gravesites of loved ones afterwards. But first, I guess, what is the proper, I guess, way of viewing
you said
it?
something pretty profound this morning in our staff sharing.
Thank you.
I think it was the staff sharing, but you said, people always told me that you won't get enough sleep.
Yep.
So get sleep while you can before you have your first child. And what did you say?
I said that I only understood what that really meant when I first had my first child.
Yeah, because you were like, I don't sleep a lot now, so I don't see how much worse it could be.
Yeah.
And then when you had your first child, like, now I understood what they meant when they said you won't get
Like
sleep.
to the full extent.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was bad.
It was, I love my daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it was profound because, as simple as what you said was, that's what death is like. Even though Christ did come up to us and he did share all these things and we have all these things, it's still a mystery because we have not crossed over yet. However, what Christ shared with us is the reality of what is to come. So it's kind of similar to someone telling you that they were on the other side, meaning they had kids and they had those sleepless nights and they told you about it. And then you're like, oh, okay, I mean, I get what you're saying. So I guess I should take that seriously, right? That kind of thing. So I thought maybe we could do 1 Corinthians 15:50 to the end. So just 9 verses. 1 Corinthians 15:50 to the end.
1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 50 to 58 reads, I tell you this, brothers, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain.
So I won't go through the whole thing. I'll go to that last verse, but also before that, I want to talk about verse 54, that song, right? In verse 55, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? When do you say that? It's when the perishable puts on the imperishable.
Right.
That's when you're going to be able to sing that.
Right.
But until then, death will be painful. Death is scary. Death is sad. Death is all these things. So when, I know that there are some conflicting things that people say about death, but they've passed on to the other side. So they don't really need to worry about it now. They can sing the song. But until we face that moment, we're going to be like, man, this is going to hurt, isn't it? Right? And for a lot of us, it will hurt. Maybe a few of us, people will pass in their sleep. I'm not sure if that really happens, but I've heard oh, he passed in his sleep. It must have been painful. It's like, I don't know. Were you there? And were you next to him when he was sleeping? What if he was gasping for air for the last 5 hours and then he died, and then you come in, you'd be like, oh, he passed away in his sleep. You weren't there.
No.
Yeah. So I don't know. So in the end, I'm just I don't know. I haven't been there. But until then, we don't know. It can be kind of scary. It's definitely sad when we're separated from our loved ones, right? Because separation causes pain. It causes sadness. And death is a separator. And so without saying much more, there will be a time when we do say it. He does give us the mystery, which I don't think we have time for now. But I will say at the very end to answer your question. He says, because of all these things that he just said, he says, therefore, what I want you to do is to be steadfast and immovable. I want you to be abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain, knowing that in the Lord, your labor is not in vain. So when you're working, what should you do? You should labor for the Lord. And he talks about in the very beginning of Corinthians that there will be some that will just be burned up and some that will last. So do the work that lasts. So we want to do the labor that lasts, the labor that will earn us a crown, the labor that will actually pass over to the next life, because there is, it's not like, oh, you die and all of a sudden it's a reset. That's not true. You will be given something, but there is something that happens now that the Lord wants us to do, because that's what's going to go beyond this life, right? And so if that's the case, if you know that now, going back to, let's say, your example of, when your daughter was first born, if I told you and then you took that seriously, get sleep while you can, what would you do? Like, there are things that you would have possibly done. Maybe you think, oh, there's nothing really that I could do, and then eventually you take the full brunt of it.
Yeah.
But what you could do is you could be as healthy as you can be, prepare for the sleepless nights that are going to come, do some research, and know that, when a baby is born, a lot of changes happens to the mother, but actually physical changes happen to the father too. And then we now know it scientifically, like men's estrogen levels increase.
Dad bod.
That's where you get classically what we know as the dad bod. Fat
Father
starts
body.
to accumulate on your midsection.
Yeah, father body, yeah.
And then so you tend to stay home. You tend to have more emotions. You care for your child. All these things happen. Like knowing that you would prepare yourself so that you can actually receive the child in a better state. There are people like that. And there are people that eventually come and just, have the worst time of their lives because they didn't prepare at all. That kind of thing.
I mean, a perfect example is our second child. Because we knew what was coming, there was a different way that we prepared for the second child in terms of just sleep alone. And so I think even between the first and second, there is a difference because you now have this knowledge, you live your life differently now, and you prepare even for that point differently.
That's also very profound.
I'm crazy today.
Yeah, but the thing about death is it only happens once. So you only have one child in this sense, right?
Yeah.
And so the Bible is continuously and constantly telling us how we should act, how we should behave, how we should conduct ourselves, in what manners can we please the Lord, in what ways we can honor Him and worship Him. And that's what we should be focused on, because these are the things that are truly important. These are the things that will last. And that's a surety, because that's what Christ said, because again, He's from the other side and He came and He would tell us the kingdom of heaven is like, and then like a mustard seed. It's like a pearl of great worth. It's like a treasure hidden in the field. He would tell us what it's like. And instead of meditating on that and then living life that way, we don't meditate on things like that. And then we're just like, what's the latest fad that we can go get into now? And then we just do that. And so when death starts to come at your door, before it comes in droves where you can't handle it and you can't think about it, it gets right at your footstep, know that even the great philosophers, the ancient thinkers, they knew that they needed to think about death because it affected how they lived life. That's just basic wisdom. But we have something even far greater than basic wisdom, the wisdom of the world. We have wisdom from God on how then we can live this life looking at death.
So I know that the way that we act and the way that we prepare and the way that we live is in connection to the way that we think and we view. And we talked about worldly philosophy, and we just read here about what we are to, I guess, how we are to prepare and how we are to live, knowing that our labor is not in vain. But I'm curious, again, I think Christians may be confused. Are we supposed to view death in joy and in sadness and maybe in fear at the same time because we don't know what it is? Like, what are we allowing ourselves to think and feel in terms of how we view death? Because I think that would be helpful for us, because are we supposed to be sad at a funeral? Are we supposed to be rejoicing? Are we supposed to then think about our lives and have fear? Like, where does that come in for the Christian?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because we're out of time, our producer is telling us we're out of time. Let me just give us a really quick one. And if we need to develop it any further, we'll do that in a later podcast. But I think it is with different dimensions, to be honest. Okay, so let's say you're a nihilist, or let's say even you're in Jean-Paul Sartre, you see the absurdity of the universe, blah, 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 blah. Everything is a mourning in the end. If you really think about it, everything is a mourning. Let me give you a quick example, and then we can move on. Nothing will ever come back again.
Yes.
In its fullness.
Yep.
Adeline, your baby, when she was a child, was so precious, was so beautiful. You loved her in this moment. Mm-hmm. And I saw this actually from a clip from Modern Family that addresses this. But it's actually nihilistic. But and then before you can even miss it, she becomes a toddler.
Yep.
And you are enjoying it before you can miss it, she becomes a preteen. enjoying. Before you can miss it, she becomes a teenager.
Oh, man.
Before you can miss it, she becomes an adult. And all at once, the baby, toddler, preteen, teenager, they all leave out the door.
Those are those are the commercials that get you.
And so
They get you.
They all leave out the door. And it's supposed to be this heart-wrenching moment. And it really is. It really is. But I'm telling you, it's a little bit on the Nietzschean side. Because let me get look, I get why it's emotional, but I'm telling you, it's because we've been so influenced by Jean-Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche, we don't even know it. If you don't have anything beyond this life, then everything is a mourning. So if you really think about it, I will never get this experience with my child that I have right now ever again.
Yeah.
And the height of this moment is the height of everything. And this will all pass away. There's nothing that's going to be good as just this moment here in terms of, Adeline being a newborn in my arms, small, vulnerable, completely in need of her father. There's nothing else.
Right.
Then you mourn for that. There's a mourning and there's a grieving because there's nothing after that. That's all you have. That's all you had. And it's just gone. It's just a memory, right? The Christian thinks about it differently. Yes, this will pass, but it is pointing to something that is even greater that God has promised. So even greater than this moment will come a time in eternity. Even greater than your 1,000,000 years of jet skiing, there's going to be something not just slightly greater, but something infinitely greater. So great that you can't put it into words because no one has seen it. And the one that has seen it that gave us a parable to show us that we cannot fathom it. Because right now we have a perishable, we have a mortal, but once we put on the imperishable, once we put on the immortal, then we could get to it.
Right.
That's when we get to it.
Right.
That's the mystery. And because of that mystery, this is something that has been given to us by the Word, has been given to us by Christ. We look forward to that. We look forward to it because it's been assured to us in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's my quick answer to that question. I hope that's okay.
So the experiences that we have in this life, and I'm sure many parents have felt that. It's like, oh, I'm never going to see my daughter smile like this again. That is not just only, that enjoyment is not only simply for that moment alone, but what it actually does is what you're saying is it points to an even greater enjoyment that we will experience with the Lord in heaven.
Yeah, but people will be like, oh, but it's not this exact moment. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. But there will be something infinitely greater that we will be given because this moment was pointing to something greater. So this moment isn't for the moment in itself. This moment is a pointer. So all of life is a pointer to the ultimate, which is what people need to really understand. So yeah, I can grieve for a moment now. But that grief is just for a moment. When someone passes, that grief is for a moment because we believe in the eternal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you. And that's very, very helpful for us to think about. And I think, again, this topic is very important, like you said, for us to think about death. And I think oftentimes because we may be so far removed from death that it's not something that we think about. But like you said, as Christians living in this world who are influenced daily by the worldly philosophies, just by virtue of, just by what we consume, it is important for us to have a biblical understanding of death and to view death in a biblical way, looking forward to the kingdom that is to come. That was a good way of ending it. I almost surprised myself a little bit. Today is a good day for me. I should write a book today.
Full of profundities, Samwise is. I should call you Samwise.
Doesn't that mean something else?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really like the meaning of that one. We'll quickly go into, thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. We'll go into a question and answer.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
In relation to the topic that we talked about. So this is interesting because no one asked this because they wouldn't have heard this. But this is a Q&A for this episode. Oftentimes in Asian cultures, we have this tradition of ancestor worship. And oftentimes when you visit the cemetery or the grave of a loved one or an ancestor, you celebrate their life by providing food in front of them, and you drink with them, and the whole point is you're serving them food and they're eating it in their grave, and that's a part of the culture of East Asia. Now, Christians in East Asia have removed themselves from this type of tradition and culture, but I think oftentimes they don't know what to do. And I think this is true in Christians in general. We don't know what to do at cemeteries. We don't know, their body is there, their soul is not there though. So how do we treat this? Do we treat this as a sacred ground in which we pray for the person that passed, but we don't pray for people that have passed? What do we pray for? Our family, but we could do that at home. We don't have to do that at this site. And so oftentimes, I think on anniversaries of loved ones passing, we tend to go to cemeteries or where they're buried. And Christians have a variety of different ways that they celebrate the lives of those who have gone. So as a Christian, understanding how we view death in light of the scriptures, what would be an appropriate way of celebrating or remembering or honoring those who have passed on at cemeteries or graves? How do we do that?
Yeah. I mean, it is apropos that you mentioned this on Memorial Day.
Yes.
Because we do want to remember the fallen that have shed their blood so that this country could be built and thrive the way it has because of their sacrifice, because of what they did. And we don't want to dishonor their memories. Right. So this is throughout culture. Confucius actually picked up on it. And this is where Asian culture really comes into play. But Confucius picked up on it because if you honor the dead, if you honor those that have passed before you, then you actually maintain social order.
Okay.
Those that don't honor those that have passed on before us, that's when he would see it as social order degrading and decreasing. I think he would probably say it as social harmony, not order, but order is more like stoicism.
Okay.
But and then we have even C.S. Lewis talked about the Tao because it's a pretty universal concept. But there's something that returns to the natural world. Tao is in Taoism, it becomes more cosmic. Everything returns to this one, thing. It's called Tao, right?
Okay.
And so death is more like a transformation. But all this being said is, Taoism will be like, this is a flow. And then we have Hinduism with reincarnation, depending on, how you lived your life now, that kind of thing.
Right.
But all that being said, every culture has this way of not only viewing death, but then from there honoring those that have passed. Because if you have a culture that doesn't honor those that have passed, that culture will eventually die, which is true. And so how do you want to honor it? Do you want to honor it in a good way or a bad way? And so I would say to fully go and do ancestor worship like Confucianism would have taught you would be wrong.
Right.
We don't honor by worshiping them.
Right.
We don't set up a little rice bowl and put in chopsticks because they're not going to eat it, right? They're dead. And so Christians have taken whatever their former culture was and kind of shifted it, evolved it to show the reality of the Christian philosophy. Uh-huh. So for case in point, visiting a tomb or a grave, visiting a tomb to honor your parents and all that stuff. That's what a lot of cultures do. Yeah. But Christians would shift it so that when they go to the tomb, they're not actually talking to their deceased, parent or friend or something like that. Right. What they would do is they would pray to God, saying thank you for the life. But about what? Oh, I see. I see. Okay. That's why we have in Christian circles, we have something, I believe it's in the Common Book of Worship Order or something like that, even in the PCA, there are memorial services. Okay. And memorial services are important to keep because not only do you remember the life that was passed, maintaining social order like Confucius wanted and all these other philosophers believed to be good, but not only to maintain the social order, but to give credit and honor to the one that gave us that social order from the people that have come before us. And so if you do honor, let's say, a deceased, parent or grandparent or a friend or a spouse, it's to ultimately give honor to God.
Yes.
So I would say that. I would say if you go to, let's say, a gravesite or something, and for the Christian, it isn't so that you visit the person. It's to remember their life here on earth, giving thanks to God for that person's life because you were profoundly impacted by that life. And by their life, you have been, formed by the power of the Holy Spirit, but through their edification to be the Christian that you are. So that's what I would do. Like,
Okay.
when I visit, like, my grandmother's burial site or my grandfather's burial site, my father usually leads a worship because, that's what we do. Sing a hymn, read a Bible passage, and we pray. We do a memorial service, and
Gotcha.
then we would
Okay.
go back, right? And so people just visit sometimes to, like, clean up
Put flowers.
and
Yeah.
the tombstone and put flowers in, and that's a way of honoring. For me, I don't think you have to go that far. That still is a little bit on the more tradition side of doing things, and I get it. And then it gives you that social order. That's great, but I don't think that's absolutely necessary. I think what is necessary is you worship God.
So I have a question. And I visit my family member's grave on the anniversary that he passed, and so this is something that my family does as well. But I'm curious though. So if the purpose of visiting a grave or a cemetery is to remember this person's life and God's grace upon this person or God's glory, can't we do that at home? And the reason why I ask this is because we can do that at home, and by virtue of visiting a grave, we are saying, but still, there is something special about this land, about this place, about this particular place that we come here and congregate and we worship. And I wonder if it's because we understand that there is a resurrection.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's true. When we had memorial services when I was a kid for my great-great-great-grandfather, we couldn't visit the tomb, like the burial site, because it was in Korea.
Korea, right, yeah.
And so we would just do it in my grandma's house. And so we would do that, whether it's my great-grandfather or my great-grandmother, we would do it at my grandma's house, and then we would have the memorial service there. But if we were to go there, it would be to know that this burial place is not the end. And just like Paul said, this person is asleep in the sense that this person will be raised up again.
Yeah.
From this place.
Right.
Right.
Like, so wherever we're buried, that's where we will resurrect.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing thing to even consider because, because if I'm buried next to my wife, the first person I'll see when I'm resurrected is my wife.
Yeah. Actually, it'll be Jesus, but sure.
Well, I mean, the first,
Yeah, it'll be Jesus.
No, I know.
And your eyes will be on him. But yeah, no, I get what you
that.
mean. I know. You're trying to be very sentimental.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
And show that you love your wife.
No,
so
I'm not
everyone
saying
here
that.
knows that you love your wife.
No, but if you're buried next to somebody, that's a pretty amazing thing to
it's
consider
awesome.
and think about.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I get it that we won't be given in marriage or be married in heaven. We'll be
Right.
like the angels, like Jesus said.
Yeah.
However, you'll know that you were married in the
Yeah.
past. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you can be very thankful for this person who was the most integral part of your sanctification in your life here on earth.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. That was a great question and a great answer. So
It was a great question.
thank you. Moving on to current events. And I think, this current event is also very sad. And I think this episode is a little sobering in that we're face to face with this question of death and the news of death and this topic of death. And so the story that we're talking about is what you mentioned before. On May 21st, 2 Israeli embassy staff members, Yaron Lischinski and Sarah Milgram, were killed by a pro-Palestinian man on Wednesday night as they were leaving the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And so this happened on May 21st. After shooting these 2 victims, the criminal then entered the museum and yelled, "Free, free Palestine." And so obviously this is very politically geared act, a violent act, and a terrible act at that. And people are calling this a terrorist attack. This is truly a sad story, and it's happening right here in our country. And my first question that I thought of when I saw this story was, how do we pray? Because how do we pray for believers that have passed? And how do we pray for non-believers that have passed? I think believers that have passed, I think it's a little bit easier because we pray, we thank God for His just grace upon this person's life, for saving them, for rescuing them, and for from them enjoying God's presence and Christ's presence in paradise. But for the non-believer, how do we pray for the non-believer?
Well, I mean, you can't pray for someone that's dead
Right.
already.
Sorry. That's very Roman Catholic of me. I take it back. How do we pray in light of
No, that's a really, really good question. I think that when we pray, we ought to pray for the gospel to be proclaimed and for hearts and lives to be changed. The sadness of the reality of death should hit everybody, especially when it's like this. It was really sad that these 2 very young people were killed just because they were Jewish. Mm-hmm. And people listening to this, I hope you understand, you cannot hate the Jewish people and want their death and still be a Christian. You cannot. You could disagree maybe with some of the policies that Israel hold. You could disagree with someone else, but you can't be like, they need to die because they killed like all these, Palestinian children and things like that. But here's something that a lot of people don't know. These 2 Jewish people were Messianic Jews.
Yes.
And so they were Christians.
Yes.
And so these are actually Christians that you're hating on if you were happy about their death. And so that's a very sad thing that people hate people just because they're Jews and they wanted to, advocate for the existence of Israel. Yeah. Things like that. And there's a way to do it that's good. There's a way to do it that's bad. There's a way to do it that's hard. I get it. And those could be all discussions that we could always have. And I've had discussions with people about this, but you cannot advocate for these random unjustified killings. And so the murders were particularly horrible because this person was obviously indoctrinated with leftist ideology, and he shot and killed these people in close range. And apparently the woman was still alive. By the way, these 2 were about to get engaged.
Yep.
He was going to they were going to go to like Jerusalem. He was going to propose there. Yeah. But while the woman was shot, she was, I guess, alive for that brief moment. And she was crawling away, and he went up to her again and shot her multiple times until he made sure that she was dead. This is a crazed murderer.
Yeah.
You have been so convinced and so, brainwashed by this ideology that you believe that you should kill someone like that in cold blood. There's something wrong with you. And there's something wrong with the world that will not condemn it or even celebrate it. And so when you say how we can pray, I think there's a lot we could pray for. We could pray for the families of the grieved, that they will find comfort. And if their entire family is not Christian, perhaps they can pray that they do become Christian. We could also pray for society at large, that we will come to our senses to know that things like this should not only be not tolerated, but they should be outright condemned immediately by everybody.
Yeah.
This should be overtly known. Like societal order maintains that we need to say like this, it shouldn't be controversial. This is just evil. You cannot go up to someone and shoot them in the head or at close range just because you believe that what their quote unquote people are doing is bad. And that, well, I'm not going to say anything because, I still disagree with what Israel is doing. It's like, come on. Like, you have gone so far off of the camp now that you can't come to rational thought that this is not the way to do it. This, in fact, is atrociously evil. So you could pray that people come to their senses. We could get some order in society, that this will be very quickly and very definitively condemned by all authorities, and no one will ever stand by something like this ever happening again.
Thank you for that answer. I think that's something that Christians may have trouble with, praying regarding the death of believers and or non-believers. And I think that's a difficult thing for us to think about, but I think that's enlightening for us to continue to pray for justice to be done and for God's will to be done. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. We will be discussing.
We will be disgusting. That's what you said?
He will be disgusting. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. We hope that you enjoy this Monday, and we hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.